Part 7, The Last Reef. Dawn broke grey and sullen over Kaunonga's bluffs. The sea behind the Imperials was red with fuel and blood, but the banners of the Hestian Amphibious Rifles still stood in the sand, planted like barnacles on rock. Men moved among the wreckage like ants upon a drowned corpse. Some hauled wire, others dug in fresh gun pits, and more carried the broken on stretchers toward the surf where hospital boats waited. The dead lay in lines beneath canvas, rifles driven into the sand to mark their resting places until burial could be afforded. Now the push inland began. Columns of men and armor ground their way up from the beachhead, treads biting into mud still slick with yesterday's gore. Engineers laid pontoons across gullies and repaired shattered causeways with planks and prayer, their tools rattling in weary hands. Artillery batteries crawled forward behind tractors, the great basilisks groaning as they were dragged up inclines made treacherous by rain. Casualty trains moved the other way, carts and carriers heaped with the broken. The silence of their passage was more haunting than the roar of the guns. Vaikato strode ahead of Third Squad, helm lenses sweeping the tree line. Behind him, Hestian platoons trudged in close file, laser guns on shoulders, faces pale with exhaustion. They looked to the black giants who walked in their midst and drew something from the sight, though none dared speak it. Koata's voice reached them over the squad net, low and certain. "We are dragging the sea across stone," he said. "Every step resists us." The enemy was not broken. Every mile inland brought another ambush, another pre-sighted kill zone. A half-burned hamlet became a fortress, its alleys lined with firing holes. A chapel gutted of its altar turned into a kill box, its upper floor collapsing in a roar of dust and fire when a platoon pressed too deep. Hestians bled for every block. A convoy of carriers rolled into a crossfire one afternoon, rockets streaking from both flanks. By the time the spears reached the scene, 2 vehicles were burning and men were scattering through the fields like prey animals flushed from cover. Scouts reported minefields seeded by hand in the night, and culverts rigged to collapse into advancing columns. In the ruins of a village, prisoners were chained across the street, their screams echoing as defenders fired from behind them. Tehoka spat when he saw it. "They choke us with their own dead." At the crossroads where 2 platoons lay pinned, the spears did not simply charge. They moved like reef hunters, each brother covering the other's advance, storm bolters cracking in disciplined bursts. One vaulted a barricade and drove his trident haft into a gunner's throat. Another placed fire precisely into firing slits, pinning defenders so comrades could cross. Vaikato rammed his weapon like a spear through a mortared seam and levered the wall wide enough for the squad to pour through. A brother hooked a trident tine behind a bunker shield and wrenched, exposing a muzzle just long enough for a single surgical burst. The strongpoint didn't fall in chaos. It was dismantled piece by piece until the last heretic inside broke and ran. The Hestians who followed in their wake saw not just power but precision, war as an art carved into living stone. Still, the defenders fought with an intensity beyond desperation. They did not shriek only in fear but in devotion. Their voices carried a rhythm, as though bound to something greater than themselves. Corporal Holden felt it too. He trudged with his platoon through the muck, seashell charm still tied to his sleeve, worn smooth by anxious fingers. Around him the men moved in silence, broken only by muttered prayers or the clatter of kit. Leahy limped beside him, jaw clenched. "Feels like the whole island's a trap," Leahy muttered. "It is," Holden answered. His voice sounded older than it had the day before. They halted at a culvert mouth. Scouts had marked tripwires. Engineers moved forward to cut them, hands steady despite the rain. Holden stared into the black hollow and thought of sea caves back home, where children dared one another to go deeper until the tide came rushing in. He felt the same dread now, the sense of something waiting to drown them. The heretics fought with more than bullets. Voxcasters hidden in ruins whispered blasphemy over Imperial bands, promising the Emperor's abandonment. Distorted chants rose from corpse piles wired with speakers, turning night into a dirge. Leaflets fluttered across the fields, icons daubed in blood, disturbingly close to runes of the sea. Koata crushed one beneath his boot. "Words are foam," he said. "The tide is iron." Even so, the spears took wounds of their own. A predator was gutted by a hidden gun slit, its turret sheared clean. The crew died inside, tech marines marking the wreck with runes in silence. An assault squad was swallowed whole when a manufactorum roof, pre-cut and propped, collapsed under them. Their Vox signals went dead between one heartbeat and the next. Another squad fought through a strongpoint and emerged with half its number, armor dripping gore. On the third night, the enemy struck back. Dusk bled into dark as Hestians dug into a shallow valley, the air damp and cold. Mortars fell in rippling brackets, sowing confusion, and then the earth split. Tunnels vomited cultists by the hundred, screaming, blades flashing. From the woods on both flanks, rockets streaked down, and the valley floor became a killing ground. Holden's platoon took the first blow. Men screamed and fell as shapes surged out of the smoke. Holden fired until his shoulder bruised, then dragged Leahy upright as a blade hissed past. The world narrowed to muzzle flashes and wet breath, and the stink of bodies pressing close. A figure vaulted the wire, grey coat, rusted cleaver high, and charged straight for the Medicae line where the wounded lay exposed. Holden didn't think. He stepped into the swing, smashed the butt of his laser gun into the man's jaw, felt bone give, and fired a point-blank shot that blew the heretic backward into the mud. For a heartbeat, he stood blinking at the corpse, breath ragged. The Medicae stared at him as if surprised he still stood. Holden spat blood and shouted over his shoulder, voice raw but steady. "Hold the line. The Emperor protects." It wasn't clever or loud, but the men nearby straightened. A loader shoved a fresh power pack home with a snarl. Another soldier braced his bayonet and set his feet. It was enough to stiffen a thinning thread. At the rear, basilisks fired danger close, barrels glowing red, while mortars turned on mobs only 50 meters away. Gunners dropped tools and fired laser guns over sandbags as cultists poured through gaps in the wire. Koata arrived with a demi-squad, his sword crackling as he smashed into the press, his men forming a wall of black ceramite around the guns. "Hold them," he roared. "The reef does not break." Through the chaos came Tahu. The dreadnought trudged through mud, hull pitted with rocket scars, heavy flamer roaring in arcs that turned men to ash. His power fist closed on bodies like driftwood, crushing them to pulp. A rocket slammed into his torso, staggering him. His Vox rumbled, sardonic even now. That tickled. His assault cannon thundered in reply, shredding the launcher crew to mist. The counterattack faltered. The line reformed behind the ceramite giants, Hestians rallying in disciplined volleys. The cultists broke against them like surf against cliff. The valley was saved, though it stank of blood and smoke. When silence finally fell, the ground was carpeted with corpses. Fires smoldered in the woods, the smoke choking. Medicae worked in mud up to their knees. Priests walked among the dying with bolt pistols in hand. Holden sat with Lehi, both men shaking, too tired to speak. He could still feel the jolt of the cleaver's impact in his arms. The seashell charm dug into his palm, and for the first time since landfall, he realized he wasn't merely hoping to survive. He wanted the thing at the heart of this island broken. "Let me see it ended," he prayed. Not only to endure, but to end. Vaikato climbed a ridge and stared at the dark beyond. They are not spent, he said. Koata stood beside him, helm tucked under one arm. No, they are drawing us in. The proof came soon after. In the black of morning, a prisoner was dragged from the ruins of a bunker, his wrists bound in bloody wire. He was gaunt, eyes fever-bright, lips torn by chanting. Unlike others, he did not spit curses when seized. Instead, he smiled, and his words came with a chilling clarity. "They wait at the heart," he rasped. "The manufactorum 3 East. It is his altar now. The Bellmaster waits, our voice, our hand, the one who rang the vigil's silence. At dusk the bell will toll, iron and bone. When it rings, the sky will open. The storm will come down, and you will never leave this world." He began to laugh, high and broken, until a bolt round silenced it. The echo carried through the valley like a bad omen. Silence lingered after the shot, the hush of men and giants measuring a new horizon. Even the smoke seemed to hang heavy, as though listening for echoes of the prisoner's last laughter. Vaikato's grip tightened on his trident. If that bell tolls, Kaunonga becomes a coffin, not just for them, for us. Koata looked out over the valley, jaw set hard. A warp beacon, a storm drawn down by blasphemy. The fleet will be shackled, the world drowned in madness. We have ours, no more. A vox link crackled, and Chapter Master Aranga Moana's voice came cold from orbit, steady as deep water. "You have your reef," he said. "Break it before it breaks us. All strength is yours, Third Company. The chapter stands behind you." Halden stood in the shadow of ceramite and iron, the seashell pressed tight in his palm. He thought of the sea back home, merciless, but at least something a man could understand, and tried to imagine a storm fierce enough to tear open the sky itself. Fear slid under his ribs like cold water, but something harder settled over it, sharp and simple. "Let me see it ended," he whispered again. Not to any ship or distant figure, but to the mud beneath his boots, to the wounded behind him, to whatever might hear a soldier's last stubborn hope. He rose, checked his lasgun with stiff fingers, and nudged Leahy with a weary boot. "Come on," he murmured. "Let's go. We're going to finish this." Koata turned from the ridge, helm settling back over his features. His voice carried across the net, calm as tidewater over stone. "Full commit. Third Company to the breach. Hestians encircle and hold. We strike before the bell tolls. The reef is before us." Engines coughed and caught. Artillery crews hauled guns into new lines by main strength. Thunderhawks screamed low, bellies heavy with warriors. The last reef had risen, and it had to be broken before nightfall. The floodlight swung east as the army turned. Engines throbbed. Tracks chattered on plates and planks. The air smelled of wet iron and spent propellant. Overhead, Thunderhawks cut low, their shadows sliding across the ruined fields like fast clouds. Storm Eagles orbited farther out, hunting for mobile guns with patient sweeps of auspex and the long, searching stare of autocannons. Vaikato checked his brothers down the line. Tridents locked to mag clamps, fresh drums on storm bolters, melter and crack charges set where they belonged. Across the company net, Koata's voice was steady as groundswells. "Third Company, this is a spearhead. Hestians encircle and hold. Predators on the spine roads, whirlwinds counter mortar and interdict. Tech Marines, you are the hinge. Hold the feeds and we hold the hour. We move." They moved. The manufactorum at Grid 3 East rose out of the mist like a black reef. Low sheds of riveted iron, towers spined with catwalks, chimneys that breathed a faint, sour heat. The nearer the force drew, the more the air seemed to press against the tongue. Not sound, a pressure behind the teeth. It set a rhythm under the heart like a second pulse. The corrupted bell had not tolled, but it was already listening. Scouts had cut the wire in 3 places, and Hestian platoons poured through, spreading like oil across the outer yards. Predators ground forward, nose to nose, sponsons ticking, muzzles hunting the dark. The first shots came from vents, disciplined bursts, not panicked. A machine gun slapped a half-section to ground. A shaped charge scissored a track. The defenders fought in teams, fell back by lane, covered one another cleanly. The enemy's hand was steady. Bellmaster's drill, Vaikato thought, and cut the channel. Breach teams, go. Third company came on like a storm. 2 squads mounted the outer wall with jetpacks. A third punched straight through a service door. Melter at hinge, crack on the lock, trident blades driving the panel in with a shriek. Inside, a catwalk T-boned a tangle of ducting. Vaikato's point man took a knee, called arcs, and the squad flowed around him like water around rock. 1 high on the rail, 1 low under the ducts, 2 covering the blind corner. The first defender stepped into the fatal triangle and took a double tap to the visor. The second was yanked forward by a trident tine, hooked through his gorget, and finished with a point-blank burst that painted the ductwork black. Left bay clear, came the report. Right bay, 2 contacts moving. The ceiling above the right bay sagged. Pre-cut columns gave at once. A slab the size of a hab room slammed down. The brother beneath it rolled with inhuman speed, came up snarling. The shockwave nonetheless knocked 2 Hestians flat and ripped a Vox aerial into sparks. Pre-cut, Vaikato voxed. Expect engineered collapses, 2-level clearance, move in pairs. They advanced in short bounds, bursts stitched door frames. Tridents were levers as often as weapons, hook, wrench, pin, then the clean kill. On a boxed stairwell, a defender waited with a satchel charge on a corded toggle. A brother smashed the toggle hand with a butt stroke, but the charge went off out of sequence anyway, blowing plaster and 2 retreating figures into a messy cloud. The squad took it as a drumbeat. No pause, no anger, just onward motion. Outside, the encirclement set its teeth. The Hestians went to earth along the manufactorum's berms and made themselves a ring of iron. Heavy teams dug guns into sandbag embrasures while engineers cut new lanes through the outer fence. Counter-battery came in fast. Whirlwinds answered, mapping the enemy fire by impact and walking rockets back along suspected mortar lines. A transport full of ammunition cooked off behind the second line and painted the sky with a yellow flower. The ring wavered, then set itself harder. "Maintain arcs," a Hestian captain barked over company net. "No gaps. If they push out, we hold them." "They'll try," Holden muttered, settling his rifle and breathing around the flutter in his chest. Leahy lay beside him, bandage grimy, jaw set. The seashell charm dug into Holden's palm like a thorn. "Let me see it ended," he told the windless air. Deep inside, the bell's pressure grew. It wasn't audible. It was felt. The manufactorum was a throat, and something within it had drawn breath. Koata's squad hit the first of the machine halls at a run. Light strobed. Ladders crisscrossed to gantries where gunners had sandbagged firing nests above conveyor beds. 3-point enfilade, Koata said, and his men took the angles by reflex. 2 to the long run, 1 up, 1 down. The first burst scythed the nearest nest. The second walked across the gun shields and cut the loader as he reached for a drum. A defender sprang from shadow with a hooked blade. Koata's Crozius took him in the hip and tore him apart like damp paper. The air tasted of hot oil and iron. Tech Marines were already at work. Surgeons in a burning hospital. One clamped a valve with 3 mechadendrites while another drove a cap, a third daubing sacrament resin as his vox cant filled the space his lungs did not. Every pipe they sealed damped the pressure a hair. Every manifold they closed drew a snarl from deeper in the works, as if the bell resented being denied its voice. "Secondary feeds at blue 6, green 3, orange 1, A tech marine voxed, runes scrolling. Cut them or the main line will back pressure. If it back pressures, this hall is a bomb. Understood, Koata said. Third squad with me, Vaikato, drive the center. We meet at the bell. Moving, Vaikato replied. They found the Bellmaster's work before they found the Bellmaster. A corridor painted with sigils meant not for reading but for feeling. The paint was mixed with ash and iron filings. The floor gritted underfoot. A hair hung in the air in that place. A prickle gathered at the roots of the teeth. At the far end, double doors stood ajar, and the hum was unmistakable, not sound but resonance like a plucked cable running through bone. Left open, Vaikato said. Hook and step. They went. The bell chamber was not a cathedral. It was worse because it pretended at function. A great iron casting hung from a gantry crane, its skin greasy with oil, its lips stitched in scrap plates, embossed with tooth and nail and coin. The clapper was a mass of welded rebar and chain, and on its bolted face, someone had embedded a mask of beaten brass, featureless, save for a slit where a mouth might be. Lines ran everywhere, fuel, air, power, turned from sensible routes into ritual paths like a river tricked by gates and dams. Men moved along the gantries, veterans in scavenged plate, priests with shaved scalps and raw throats, and in the center beneath the hanging iron, a figure stood in a coat of flensed leather strips and chain. He wore no helm. His face was finely cut, almost handsome, ruined by a lattice of small old scars. His eyes were very steady. He had the look of an officer who had learned obedience before command. The Bellmaster looked down at Vaikato, as if greeting a guest. You came from the sea, he said, his voice the calm under all surf. Good. All things return to it, even angels. You broke our reefs. You bled your men for our stones. Now I ring, the sky opens, and your fleet drowns in air. There was no foam at his lips, no wildness. It was worse because he believed like a soldier, quietly, with the whole of himself. Your bell won't sing, Vaikato said and lifted his weapon. The Bellmaster smiled with one corner of his mouth. He extended a hand, palm up. Up close, the flaws in him showed. The scars were not all from blades. Some were old seam lines along the jaw, ridges that hinted at plates beneath skin. A nick on his palm bled not wholly red, but flecked with a faint wrong violet. His pupils did not track like a man's. They drew tight and relaxed with a slow vertical flicker, as if another set of lids had ideas about light. You think this is chaos? He asked softly. Chaos is waste. We are inevitable. We rang your vigil silent. Your priests blamed demons, your officers blamed men. We were family. We are everywhere family. When this bell tolls, every kin brood from this island to the edge of your shipping lanes will wake and make ready tables. Your chapter will not drown in madness, only in welcome. His smile broadened gently, like a man remembering his first child's weight. Vaikato angled his helm a fraction. The fury he felt was cold. The so-called forces of chaos on this world were genestealers all along. Your family dies here. The Bellmaster's face spread into a grin wider than a human's should be, showing sharp, pointed teeth as his brass-scarred hand closed into a fist. He clapped once. The chamber erupted. Guns on the side gantries opened in perfect overlap. 2 heavy weapons stitched the entrance. 2 more raked the higher angles. A satchel charge tumbled from a catwalk and blew the front left brother off his feet. The squad did not bunch. They split and flowed, 2 across the floor under the gantline shadow, 2 straight-up ladder rungs, tridents carried crosswise to catch a throat or block a muzzle. Vaikato took the long run to the central platform. Rounds struck his pauldron and sparked away. Tex, he voxed, the lines. We need 40 seconds, came the reply. hands already on wheels and levers. Hold the platform. If they open the air feeds, the resonator actuates. 40, Vaikato repeated, then cut to the outer net. Hestian's status. Encirclement holds, a captain crackled back. They're testing West Berm. We are... A detonation cut the line. A calmer voice replaced it. We are holding. West gun still firing. Good, keep the noose tight. The bell swayed in all this wind like a thing that yearned to speak. The pressure in the air pulsed, 1, 2, 3, like a distant heartbeat learning its drum. Koata's squad broke a gantry by shooting its support pins. 3 defenders fell with it and were finished before they rose. On the floor, a brother pinned a gunner's wrist to the rail with a trident tine and fired 2 clean bursts into his ribs. The next brother vaulted him, grabbed the traverse handle and walked the gun's fire into the opposite nest, the muzzle never drifting outside discipline. A priest with a flensing hook reached a tech marine's back. Tahu's answering burst scissored him into smoke and cloth. Tahu strode through a blown loading bay like a walking bastion, armor streaked with ash, heavy flamer spitting ropes of fire. Autogun rounds sparked and flattened on his sarcophagus. A rocket hit him square in the chest. He rocked back a step and laughed, a grinding, delighted thunder on the channel. You'll need better fireworks, he rumbled, and his assault cannon turned the launcher crew into mist. Tech Marines worked like men in a burning ward. Blue 6 sealed, one voxed, resin foaming along a flange. Green 3 is binding, force required. Force applied, came another, servo limbs whining as a wheel shrieked and turned. Orange 1 exposed. Whoever cut this line doesn't understand pressure, they understand patterning. Then unmake their pattern, Koata said. Seal the mouths, smother the song. Vaikato closed on the central platform. The Bellmaster dropped lightly from the gantry to meet him. He drew a blade no longer than his forearm. It was not ornate. It had been sharpened and sharpened again until the line of it was as fine as a whisper. He moved like a man who had learned to fence in cramped rooms. They cut at each other without ceremony. Trident caught blade, locked, slid, disengaged. The trident's butt came for knee and hip. The knife turned and kissed the haft. Twice the knife bit Vaikato's vambrace and left bright scratches. Twice the trident smashed iron and set the bell thrumming with a low, eager note. Do you hear it? The Bellmaster asked, eyes steady, breath soft. It already loves your name. I hear a dead thing, Vaikato said, and drove him back with a flurry that would have broken a lesser wrist. The Bellmaster folded around the force, stepped inside, and for an instant his coat swung wide at the ribs. What lay beneath was not quite a man's symmetry. A second shoulder ridge showed under the skin like a ghost organ. The pectoral line parted wrong when he twisted, as though another set of muscles had been trained to pretend. His teeth, when he smiled again, were very even, very white, very regular. You cannot cut blood from blood, he murmured, and feinted so honestly it almost landed. Only Vaikato's dock-learned reflex of hooking a haft behind an ankle saved him. He wrenched, dragged the Bellmaster forward off balance, and slammed his shoulder into the man's chest, driving him toward the bell's pedestal. The knife kissed Vaikato's gorget and skittered. The trident's point sank into iron and made the bell throb, a pulse that ran out through the floor and into the walls and into the chimneys and into the air, a test beat of a pulse as yet unborn. 30 seconds, the tech marine voxed. 2 feeds left. If they open the air, the resonator actuates and the waveform will cross into... Koata's voice cut in. I don't speak tech marine, Tavake. Translation? If it tolls, Tavake replied, and even his machine-modulated tone flickered with disquiet. The signal will walk machine spirits and minds across system-wide routes. It will call, not to warp, but to any kin minds attuned to it. Every brood cell within broadcast range will receive instruction. If there are sleepers off-world, on the supply moons, on the route stations, if there are ships with stowaway clades, sector-level contagion, Koata finished flat. Understood. The chamber seemed to lean toward the bell. Men on gantries shouted oaths that were shaped like prayers, but not to saints a human tongue might name. A priest slit his palm and smeared blood on a lever. A handler pulled a valve wheel and a hiss answered somewhere in the iron. Airline opening, a tech marine barked. They're trying... Tahu stepped into the airfeed's shadow and bathed the lever in fire until the metal ran. Try harder, he said pleasantly. On the platform, the knife came low, then high, then vanished. The Bellmaster moved with terrifying economy. Vaikato parried, felt the blade skitter, turned the haft, and brought the lower point up in a short arc that would have split a man from belly to heart. The Bellmaster twisted in a way no human joint had license to twist. The point grazed and slid, and in that grazing scrape, Vaikato felt the truth in his bones. This thing wore a man like a first fitting. It had learned him. It believed in a family that had other shapes. 15, the tech marine whispered, strain in his augmetic pistons. Green 3 locked. Orange 1 Primarch preserve me turns against the thread. The Bellmaster hissed a not-quite word. It chittered around the edges. It made the pressure behind the teeth spike. The wall aperture nearest Holden belched cultists. They came in a compact wave, disciplined, weapons tight, 2 with charges, 1 with a drum to keep cadence. The Hestians on the west berm were ready. On my word, the captain breathed and lifted his hand. When he chopped it down, the line fired as one. The first rank folded. The second rank stepped into the holes and fired back with grim poise, rounds pinging off sandbags and helmets. A charge man made the gap. Holden rose and shot him twice center mass and once in the throat and felt nothing. Another made the lip of the berm. Leahy bayoneted him in the lung and kicked him back down the slope. The third charge man flung his pack. It landed short. The blast filled the air with dust and the taste of detonator. Holden wiped grit from his mouth with the back of his hand and realized he had spoken without knowing it. For Kaunonga. The words had shaped themselves and gone. He kept firing. The line held. Inside, Koata fired on the move and vaulted a ruptured line, his sword a streak of cracking light. Finish it, he voxed, breath perfectly steady. Taken, Vaikato said, and committed. He feinted high with the outer tine and stepped inside as the blade moved to parry, hooking the haft hard behind the Bellmaster's calf and wrenching, dockyard judo learned on wet stone. With the same motion, he rammed his armored shoulder into the chest and drove the knot man toward the stanchion. The Bellmaster turned the trip into a fall that saved him from the first killing thrust. The trident slammed iron and made the bell answer, a hungry infant sound. A burst snapped across the platform. Not gunfire, but the sharp metallic bark of Vaikato's boot impacting steel as he surged forward. The Bellmaster struck first, impossibly fast, even with one arm slicked from earlier blows. The knife flickered low, then high, then gone. Only the blur of intent remained. Vaikato met the assault head-on. His gauntlet snapped out, caught the Bellmaster's wrist mid-feint and wrenched. Bone, or what passed for bone, cracked like green wood. The blade fell. The Bellmaster did not scream. He only stared at the ruined limb with that same disturbing curiosity, as if observing a tool failing in unexpected ways. Then, with his remaining strength, he lunged and clamped the injured hand, fingers too long, tendons too many, around Vaikato's trident haft in a grip meant to resist the inevitable. Vaikato did not allow it. Vaikato twisted. Bones cracked. The hand slipped. The trident's head went in clean between ribs and out the back, pinning the Bellmaster to the stanchion. The trident punched deeper, pinning the Bellmaster to the bell's pedestal. Metal rang. The creature's breath hitched once, a sound halfway between a gasp and a question, as if it still could not understand how a thing of flesh and bone had stopped it. Vaikato leaned his weight onto the haft. "This family," he said quietly, "ends here." For an instant, the pressure behind the teeth ceased. The bell seemed to hang in breathless suspension, as if the iron paid attention to the last look in a face that could not quite keep its mask. The Bellmaster's composure peeled a fraction, the cheekbones spread too wide. The jaw worked on a hinge not meant for a human skull, and when the mouth opened, a thin inner frill of tissue flickered, failing to decide which set of instincts to obey. "You cannot," he tried, and the last word came out as a soft animal click. "Third feed sealed," the tech marine barked. "Dumping pressure now." He spun the final wheel. Resin foamed. Clamps shook. Deep in the manufactorum, a relief valve screamed open. The bell gave a final frustrated shiver and went quiet, not merely in sound, but in the way the air stopped tasting wrong. The second heartbeat in everyone's mouth went away. "Detonate residuals," Koata ordered. "Burn the paint. Sanctify what can be saved. Tahu, cut their air for good." Flamers washed sigils from walls. Tech marines broke manifolds and poured blessed oil down their throats. Chaplains raised croziuses and spoke in voices as calm as rain. The black standard of Third Company unfurled from the gantry like a night flower. Outside, the encirclement bent, then straightened. The hybrids tried one last sally and ran into a curtain of Hestian fire that cut them down in rows. Holden stood in that line, cheek to stock, the seashell charm tight in his fist between shots. When the last attacker fell, he lowered his rifle by inches, and only then noticed his mouth had shaped words again. "We did." He felt tired enough to sleep for a week. He felt like a wire pulled taut, and at last let go. "Hold fast," the captain said, softer now. "It's done." Within the bell hall, Vaikato tugged his trident free and let the body slide to the grate. It twitched, not a death spasm, but a strange rhythmical shiver, as if some far signal had not yet learned that this node was dark. He watched the face sag, and as it sagged, the illusion of symmetry slipped. The teeth were too even, the palate too wide. The jaw hung a fraction too low, as if it had once learned to open farther and could not now forget. A faint, sour odor rose, like stale yeast. "Not chaos," Koata said, helm lenses narrowing. "A brood." The word hung like a cold draft. They had thought they fought madmen whipped by devils. They understood now they had fought something older, colder, breeding still. "Range?" Koata asked, turning to the tech marine whose auspex hummed with fresh readings. The adept's voice was flat with data. The resonator would have bled into every channel that can carry a mind: vox, machine noosphere, astropathic harmonics. With the manufactorum's wind stacks, the signal would have piggybacked thermal columns to the high air. Effective broadcast, if unopposed, to the whole Kaunonga cluster and along trade relays to at least 3 neighboring systems. Anything kin-tuned in port cities, mining hubs, pilgrim stations, any sleeper clade would have heard. Some would have woken now, others would have taken instruction, nested, waited. Vaikato tasted iron in his mouth. Sector-level contagion. Yes. Koata lifted his helm and spoke on the command band. "Chapter Master." Aranga Moana's reply came from orbit, deep and steady as the deeps. "We read the pressure drop. We read your banner. What do you see, Koata?" "Our foe is not the arch-enemy. A Genestealer brood. Their bell was a psychic amplifier, not sorcery. If it had told, it would have called kin to uprising along the lanes. Not only this world, neighbor systems, maybe farther, if echoes caught the right weather. The long pause held no surprise, only measure. "Understood," Aranga said at last. "Transmit all captures and auspex. I will warn the astropaths and the sector fleet. Quarantine advisories to all ports in the chain. We salt every manufactorum like this we find. We burned a reef. There may be shoals we cannot yet see." Koata's gaze moved once to the corpse at his brother's feet, then to the black iron above them. "Aye, Chapter Master." They came out into light made thin by smoke. Hestians were already stacking weapons, gathering prisoners, laying their dead in orderly rows. Priests moved between them like black gulls on a bleak shore. Tahu stood half sunk in a crater, the grime on his hull washed to streaks by a sudden shower. He lifted one arm in a clanking salute. "About time," he rumbled, and no one tried to hide their tired grins. A few hundred meters away, Halden sat with his comrades, watching the Astartes emerge from the complex. Leahy followed his gaze. "Do you think they noticed us at all?" he asked. Halden nodded slowly, as if setting a stone in his mind. He looked down at the seashell in his palm. It felt foolish and sacred at once. "We held," he said, "and we will again, not bravado, not prayer. Information." He surprised himself hearing it. By dusk, the manufactorum's chimneys gave off only steam, no more breath for the bell. Hestian banners hung above the gates, salt-stained and torn. The chapter's black standard moved in the evening air like a piece of night that had decided to stay. Signal crews hammered up a mast on the roof and flagged fresh codes inland. Medici stacked their last blood bags and counted them against names. Engineers welded a seal plate over the bell gantry's master switch and stamped it with the chapter's sigil. On the ridgeline, Koata stood with his helm under his arm and watched the long grey line of the sea. The beachhead glittered with lamps. The inland fires dwindled to embers. Vaikato stood beside him, the trident's shadow long. "We dragged the tide across stone," Koata said. "I think we broke the stone," Vaikato answered. Above them, the tide's eternal held her station, a dark moon over a darker sea. Chapter Master Aranga Moana's final orders came on a channel that sounded almost like quiet surf. "Reform, recover, remember. Task Force Matanui will sweep the chain for brood signs. Astropathic warning to the whole Kaunonga subsector and beyond. Quarantine protocols for the pilgrim lanes. Where we find these bells, we break them. Where we find their families, we end them. The current carries us onward." The war was not ended everywhere. It rarely is. But here on this island, on this shore, the last reef was broken, and a signal that could have awakened a sector died in iron and oil, beneath the boots of men who had learned to stand in the surf and not be moved. And the tide was with them. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe if you have enjoyed this tale.